And we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Greg has been with us for about 2 years. He is one of our education specialists at the Cognitive Empowerment Program. And like myself, Greg is a Georgia State University alumni, where he went for his undergraduate. He also just completed his master's in 2020 in nutrition and human performance from Logan University. And Greg is really interested in the effects of chronic disease, the impact of nutrition, specifically working with men, knowing that they have higher rates of chronic disease. We are going to be able to really connect a little bit with his expertise, especially after being in CEP with us for a while. He knows what our audience has been asking for. We've been talking about this nutrition label reading for a good while now. So we'll go ahead and let things get turned over to Greg. Good to see you. Good to be seen, Greg. Go ahead and get started for us.
Great to see you as well. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, and I'll try to update your name really quickly, and take away the Matt name in front of you. Give me just one moment, and I'll get that
No
updated
problem.
for you.
No problem. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Gregory LaFortune. Really happy to be here today. And I really like talking about nutrition. If you probably can't tell by now, I really am passionate about this topic. And thank you for everyone who's been engaging with us so far. So today we're going to be talking about a couple of different things to look at on a food label. It says 10 things to look for on a food label. And I want to make this as interactive as possible. So there are going to be times where I ask that you type an answer into the chat box in regards to our presentation today. It's not a quiz, no pressure, no worries, just a way to keep us engaged as we go through today's presentation. So when we're looking at nutrition labels, last presentation we had when we talked about nutrition, we talked about the different components of a food label, right? You have a food label and then you have a nutrition label. Today, we're going to be delving more into the nutrition label side of things. But when it comes to the food label, you have the name of the product, the general item of whatever you're looking at, right? It's supposed to say the manufacturer's name. There are certain things to look at. But when we're talking about a nutrition label in particular, there are a couple of different reasons why we know it's important. We know that knowing how to read a nutrition label helps us know what we are putting into our bodies. And it helps us make better choices around food. It tells us the nutritional content of the foods that we choose. And this is a good illustration right here that shows you different things to look at when we're looking at a nutrition label. And today we're going to be talking about 8 of those specifically, but then I'll talk about 2 extra things to look at that are not a part of the nutrition label or the nutrition facts, but are part of the food label in general. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please let me know and I'll be able to address those. All right, so let's get started. So the first thing that I want to talk about is our serving size. All right, this is really important, as I shared last time, because you have a difference between the serving size and then the servings per container. When we're talking about serving size, we're talking about the common household measures, right? We're talking about, the food might say serving size, 3/4 of a cup, or it might say 1 tablespoon. It might say a slice, a piece, a jar, whatever it is. Then it'll follow that out with the amount in grams of that food. This is according to the FDA. So this right here is the amount of product that the whole nutrition label is going to be about. So if I go back to this photo right here, if the serving size was 1 piece, for example, on that nutrition label, and if you have a nutrition label around you, I encourage you to look at it to see what I'm talking about. So if the serving size said 1 piece, everything on this nutrition label is in reference to that 1 piece. All right. So that's the serving size. Servings per container tells us how many servings are in that 1 container or jar or box, whatever the case may be. This is very important to know because if I go back to this picture again, this here says serving size, 1 cup. Then it says servings per container, 2. A lot of us would read this nutrition label as if everything in that container consists of everything that this nutrition label says. But no, if we remember what we just said, everything here regarding the total fat, cholesterol, sodium, carbs, whatever you want to consider is in reference to that 1 serving size. So if I want to find out how many total grams of fat, for example, which is highlighted in the yellow, is in this whole container, I have to multiply 12 times 2 because there are 2 servings in this container. Very basic, very important to understand as we continue to understand the serving sizes. Something else we want to pay attention to is the amount of calories. So this is not where I'm saying that we need to count our calories or we need to, be into any kind of restrictive dieting or anything like that. But the calories is important to know in general when it comes to the food and nutrition label. So what is a calorie? Like if we look up the scientific definition of a calorie, we see that it's a unit of energy equivalent to the heat energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. This sounds very, very confusing. In essence, just know that a calorie is a unit of energy. All right, our body thrives off of energy. And we have 3 major sources of calories. We get them from proteins, which will give us 4 calories per gram. We'll look more into that to see what that means. We see carbohydrates that give us 4 calories per gram. And then we see dietary fat, which gives us 9 calories per gram. And I've included an example here that tells us if we were to have 20 grams of protein in a meal, or if we were to read our nutrition label and find out that the item that we're consuming has 20 grams of protein, which is a really good source of protein, by the way, we multiply this by 4 to calculate how many calories that is going to give us. All right, the same thing applies for our carbohydrates. If I were to have 10 carbohydrates, I would multiply that by 4 to get 40 calories. Now with dietary fats, that number then changes to 9 because per 1 gram of fat, you have 9 calories, right? So that's why foods that are higher in fat tend to be higher in calories because where if I were to have 20 grams of protein, I times that by 4 to get 80 grams. If I were to have, to get 80 calories, if I were to have 20 grams of fat, I times that by 9 to get 180 calories compared to the 80 calories that I'm getting from proteins and carbs. All right, I know that's a lot. If you have any questions, again, let me know. But in general, calories are something else to be aware of when we're talking about our food and nutrition labels. Okay. Another thing I want you to be aware of when you're looking at your nutrition labels are the percent daily values. So these are on the right side, typically in that column, we see that percentage, right? So this is the percent of recommended amount in that specific product for that specific category. So if we see here, like let's say 1% here, we see that 1%, this is talking about dietary fat. So it's telling us based off of a 2,000 calorie diet, 1 serving of X food is giving you 1% of the total amount of fats that you should have for that day. This is the most common way of understanding this, right? So everyone has different needs, right? This is based off of a 2,000 calorie diet, which on average is what people consume daily, a lot more in some cases, a lot less in other cases. But this tells us in general, what's the recommended amount percentage-wise that we should consume. So some things to be very careful for, right? We want to be careful for the total percentages of things like saturated fats, things like sugar, carbohydrates in some cases, proteins, but we'll get more into that as we continue to go. Again, that's what this means, the percentage of our daily values recommended for that particular line item in that product. All right, so now number 4. And mind you, this is just a list that I came up with that I feel like is really important to know. There are certain things that are not part of this list that are important to know as well, but we're talking about some of the most important things to look at. Now we're looking at saturated fats. Now I want everyone to draw their attention to this nutrition label here. That is 1, sausage. And in this sausage, this is one link. I found this on nutritionics.com, which is one of my favorite places that I find my calories counters at. So in this 4-inch long piece of sausage, we see the total grams of fat 19. Now, again, going based off of our last thing, the percent daily value, we see that the percent daily value of that 19 grams is roughly 24% of our total amount of fat that we should be consuming in one day. Mind you, again, this is just an average. Now, the saturated fat, 6.3. And if we go to our daily values, the percentages, we see that this is 32-ish% of the daily value of saturated fats. So if I were to eat one of those sausage links, I'm getting about 1/3 of the amount of saturated fats that I should be getting in one day. Now, let's talk about saturated fats then. Saturated fats are a type of fat that has been known to cause plaque buildup in the arteries, promote inflammation, and elevate cholesterol. This is associated with increased risk of heart disease and stroke. And we already know in regards to the MIND diet, we really want to be mindful of our hearts because heart health and brain health are closely associated, right? We have vessels, we have nerves that run through the heart, same concept, we have them that run through the brain. That's why we want to be careful and be mindful of our saturated fats. Now, if you're asking me of sources for saturated fats, I will tell you that they come mainly from animal fats, especially the really fatty cuts of those red meats. They come from coconut and palm oil. So these are 2 sources that are not animal fats that we find high saturated fats in, coconut and palm oil, and a lot of sweets. Not all sweets have saturated fats. It's typically the sweets that are associated with animal fats. So high butter or milk, those type of sweets. So we're talking about like chocolate bars, pastries, those things will contain some saturated fats. And again, it's just one of those things where we want to be very careful for. How many of us are surprised? Just type your comments in the chat. How many of you are surprised to see that 1 4-inch, again, if we're talking about 4 inches, we can kind of measure that out somewhat with our hands here, contains about 30% of that saturated fat amount that we should be consuming for that day. And for some of us, we may be consuming multiple of those. This is no judgment, but again, this is just to show you the amounts of saturated fats in some of those things. Some other things might be a nice cut of steak or a piece of rib, right? We want to be very careful, especially as Memorial Day is approaching. We want to watch out for how many, animal fats we're consuming. We want to be very mindful and very careful just to promote health and longevity as much as possible. So I think somebody said something. Somebody says that they are not surprised. All right. So yeah, just keep that in mind, right? Saturated fats, we want to be just very mindful of that. And yes, that was from a sausage. So this one, sodium, this is also something we want to be very careful for as well, because sodium is where we kind of see elevated risk for hypertension, which is high blood pressure. All right, so we want to stay under 2,300 milligrams of sodium. And if you have hypertension or of risk of hypertension, under 2,000 milligrams, and actually much lower if you actually have hypertension as well. All right, so Sodium, in this case, this product has 562 milligrams of sodium, which is giving us 24% of that daily recommended amount. So some things to be careful for when it comes to sodium, we find high sodium amounts in frozen foods. We find them in canned foods. So these are just some common sources of sodium. All right. Somebody asked me, somebody said most people probably eat at least 2 of those sausages. Is it different for turkey sausage? Great question. Not very different. To be honest with you, if we're talking about like sodium content, no. But if we're talking about fat content, turkey sausage will have a little bit less saturated fat than your normal pork sausage, but they're still both going to be relatively high in those fats and saturated fats. So again, it's just one of those things that you want to be careful for. Now, if I were to choose one, as far as having the lower saturated fat amount, it would be the turkey sausage, yes, but still both will contain some. Somebody said still processed. So yes, both are still processed. And the term process, we have to be very careful because you have what we call chemical processing, which takes, adds chemicals and different things like that to improve shelf life and whatnot. Then you have what we call mechanical processing. So that's literally turning flax seeds into ground flax seeds, right? That's just changing the form of the actual product. So the actual word processed could be more detrimental, could be completely safe and okay, right? So we just want to put that differentiation there and just say that in general, the term processing is not necessarily a bad thing, but it depends on what, of course, the processing type is in this case. 2,000 milligrams equals 1 teaspoon of salt. Not quite. 2,000 milligrams is equal to 2 grams, but I don't really know how that equates to the amount of teaspoons. I would have to type that in. So I would just suggest that you just type that in. 1 milligram equals, or 2,000 milligrams equal how many grams of salt, or how many teaspoons of salt, just to get that quick conversion. All right, so we talked about a couple of things so far. We talked about some things to look at. We talked about serving size. We talked about calories, talked about saturated fats. We talked about sodium. So a question that I had for you, and type it in the chat box if you know this, but I didn't give you any insight to anything regarding this food right here. So this 562 milligrams of sodium is in what food? What food is this nutrition label for? And I know this is a very, you're getting very limited context here, but what food do you think this is in reference to? Any guesses? Somebody guessed soup. Somebody said sausage. Frozen veg. Package of oatmeal. Okay, getting some good guesses. I'll go ahead and let you know that those who said sausage are correct. So this is this very exact same nutrition label that I used for the saturated fat example. And let me pull it back a little. So as you can see here, right, that one link of that 4-inch sausage that gave us that 19 grams of fat and 6 grams of saturated fat also is giving us that amount of sodium that you can see here. So yes, this was for the sausage. Great job. Some of you might have seen it already because I accidentally skipped to it. All right, so now talking about sugar. Sugar is something to be mindful of as you're going through your nutrition labels. We want to put a differentiation between our, oh my goodness, I'm messing this up. We want to put a differentiation between our naturally occurring sugars versus our added sugars, right? Just because you see sugar on a label doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. The fact is our body thrives on sugar. It's our main fuel source. The brain needs sugar in order to function. So having sugar is not a problem. What we want to be careful for is where our sugar is coming from. So let's say, for example, on a nutrition label, you might see added sugars, right? These are sugars that were literally added to the product in order to make it more sweet, to make it more palatable. That's where we want to be careful, because those added sugars literally don't have any other nutritional benefit outside of the fact that they have sugar. And we know high sugar can result in a lot of different things in reference to our health. So we want to be careful there. But let's say, for example, we're getting sugar from apples, or we're getting sugar from blueberries or strawberries, right? These are naturally occurring sugars that 9 times out of 10 are also attached with other beneficial properties as well. Those are the type of sugars that we want to promote. That if we are having sugars, we want to have more of those type of sugars and less of our added sugars. So here we can see this product here has 35 grams of carbohydrates. Now, what I want you to see is that under the category of carbohydrates, you have dietary fiber and you have sugar. So a lot of times, if you add up those two things, it's going to give you two components of carbohydrates. So if we want to consider what a carbohydrate is, it's going to be dietary fibers in our diets, in our sugars. Plus, it'll be starches as well. Those three things typically add up to give us the total amount of carbohydrates in that food. So many of you probably have already seen it before, but I was going to ask you, what do you think this food is? If you didn't see it already, I just wanted to give you a chance to guess. What do you think this food is that has 29 grams of sugar? And as you're guessing, somebody said, is 2 grams of added sugar acceptable? I thought maybe. So 2 grams of added sugar is very low for some kind of product. So this product specifically here, somebody guessed cereal. That's a pretty good guess, but not quite it. So this product here has 29 grams of sugar. The issue that I have with this one, or that anybody can possibly see, is that 29 grams of sugar, but the product has 35 grams of carbs. Keep in mind, I said that if we're talking about carbohydrates, there are three things under carbohydrates. Well, in this label, it's only two, but you have dietary fiber, you have sugar, and you have starch. These three things typically add up to give you the total amount of carbohydrates. This one does not have grams of starch on there. This product has 29 grams of sugar, and the product has 35 grams of carbohydrate. That's very high as far as sugar. If we're looking for any type of carbohydrate, we want a good amount of it to come from dietary fiber. When in this case, the bulk, maybe we can even say closer to 90% of this is coming from that sugar, which is where we want to be careful for. Somebody said it looks like some kind of candy bar with nuts in it for protein. That's a very good guess. That's actually probably the most accurate guess in this case. This is a chocolate bar. All right. So great guess. It could have had nuts in it, but that protein probably came from the fact that a chocolate bar has milk in it, and milk does have protein. That was a great guess, though. Cereal was a good guess too, but typically cereal won't have that much sugar per serving. You might, I mean, if we're looking at, for example, some of the highest sugar might be the ones that have raisins in them, or like chunks of fruit. Typically those kid cereals are very high in sugar, but in this case, it wasn't necessarily indicative of a cereal. All right, number 7, we want to pay attention to the amount of fiber in the food. All right. So what is fiber? We all hear it all the time. It's a type of indigestible carbohydrate. What does that mean? That means that it stays in your body much longer. It feeds the good bacteria inside of the gut, which is also beneficial for your health. Typically, it's associated with keeping you fuller longer because it stays in your system for a longer period of time. It goes right through your digestive tract, goes into your colon, to your intestines, and then gets eliminated through your number two, right? So this promotes healthy bowel movements and promotes gut health. Your fiber is typically going to be found in foods like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, legumes, nuts, and seeds. And I can't ask you the question here because it says it right there. But as you can see here, this product, as we saw in the last product, right? This one has 41 grams of carbohydrate. But look how much of these carbohydrates come from dietary fibers, 15 grams, right? And we see that 0.6 grams come from sugar. So this is literally the complete opposite of our last chocolate bar. This right here is black beans, right? Black beans are going to give us a good percentage of that coming from our dietary fiber. And 0.6 of that is 0.6 of that has sugar, 0.6 grams of sugar, while 15 grams are coming from our dietary fiber. I mean, that right there is a really great source of dietary fiber. And if we look at the percentage of our daily values, 1 cup of black beans are giving us over half of our recommended amounts of daily fiber for the day. Very good source of fiber, very good for our overall health. And as we see, these are found in our fruits and vegetables mainly. And then we have protein, right? So protein is really important to know. This is really good for building lean muscle mass. This is really good, especially as we begin to advance in age. We want to preserve our lean muscle mass. Our muscle mass starts to decline. This is why as we age, we start to feel weaker and we start to have decreased strength. That's why our protein needs as we begin to age increase, right? So this is why we want to make sure we're checking foods, making sure they have good protein sources. And not all foods are meant to have protein, and that's okay. That's why it's good to get a good balanced nutrition to promote our protein intake as much as possible. All right, so the building blocks of protein are what we call amino acids. So you might have heard of things like collagen, for example. Collagen is a combination of a couple of different amino acids that come together that are good for joint health, muscle health, and etc. That's why somebody who has damaged joints or somebody who has damaged cartilage or something like that might take some collagen that's going to support that. So that's not a complete protein, but proteins in general are consisting of amino acids that come together to form that. Now, there are certain types of proteins, right? We have animal proteins. These are what we call complete proteins. There are a couple of amino acids that you need to get from your diet that your body cannot make. All the other ones your body can make. All of them are found in your animal products. They are also all found in things like soy, which is a plant-based protein, also found in things like quinoa, which is another plant-based protein. So you have both animal and plant proteins. The difference is you can get a lot more protein for the same amount of animal product than you would for a plant-based product. That's probably the biggest difference there. Also, too, the body is able to digest, absorb, and use proteins that come from animals at a much higher rate than they are able to do so with plant-based proteins. Both are great ways to get protein in, but I just wanted to highlight that for you. So in this product right here, we see that 1 fillet of salmon, and again, it gave away the answer, is giving us 50 grams of protein, which is a pretty good amount of protein, right? The reason why we don't see daily percentages for proteins is because your needs vary, right? Someone who is a muscular athlete or needs protein for athletic performance requires much more protein than somebody who is sedentary and does not move or who's not physically active. Somebody who may have some sort of chronic kidney disease might need less protein than somebody who is on dialysis at a much more progressed chronic kidney disease state. So the protein needs differ. That's why you won't typically see a daily percentage value on that protein intake or on that protein amount. Just wanted to share that with you. I also want to draw your attention to the total fat in one fillet of salmon, right? We see that the saturated fat, 4.5 grams, giving us 27% of our recommended intake for saturated fat. But I want you to see how outside of that saturated fat, we see the other two types of fat in this total fat are our polyunsaturated and our monounsaturated. So these typically come from more plant-based sources of foods, but also fatty fish, which goes to show fatty fish is a really great source of healthy fats that are going to promote heart health and going to really be good for our energy levels in general. So that's why salmon, fatty fish are one of those things that are recommended on the Mind diet, because they have those typically those fats that are associated with plants are found in fatty fish. All right, so I wanted to share that with you. Now, this is number 8, right? We talked about some other ones, but 2 that I wanted to add are, this is not part of the actual nutrition facts, but we want to always be mindful of the expiration date on our products, making sure that, we're consuming those in a timely manner and not making sure that we're not eating foods that are expired or going past their best used by date. And 2, I also wanted to share with you the ingredients, all right? This is not part of the actual nutrition facts, but the ingredients label is very important because it shows us what's actually in the food. And the order of ingredients show us the quantity of which that ingredient is present in that food. So if we see that the first ingredient of something is sugar, it tells us that the majority of that product is high in sugar. It just tells us the abundance of that product is sugar. Now, let's say, for example, we're reading the ingredients and we see things like whole wheat flour, then we see another ingredient, then we see another ingredient. Closer to the bottom of that ingredient list, we see sugar. It tells us that a very small percentage of that total ingredients, or of that total, the ingredients in that food consist of sugar. So if it's at the top of the ingredient list or closer to the beginning, it tells us more of that product is made up of whatever is in that amount. And it goes by, decreasing amounts as you continue to go on with that food label. So I wanted to share that with you. This was salmon. These are just some sources that I used to create this presentation. And I would love to hear if there were any questions at this time.
Thank you, Greg. It's so good to figure out how we can learn how to use nutrition labels to support our journey in the Mind diet, because I know that in the beginning of that process of being told, you're going to have to consider changing your diet after a big diagnosis. It's the first question is how. And so reading those nutrition labels and starting to learn how to eliminate some of the higher the items that don't necessarily have the benefits that some of the other things that we might be seeking as alternatives have for brain health. So we
Yes.
definitely had some questions come into the chat. And
Nice.
when we're thinking about reading labels, one of the questions that came in the chat is how to know where the product is from. Is there a way when we read nutrition labels to know where something is made?
Yes. Some, for example, like if we're looking at like a tag on your clothing, right? It says this product was made in blah. But in some cases, the actual place of manufacturing, one of the things that has to be on a food label, again, you have food label, then you have nutrition label. So the one thing that has to be on the food is where the product was manufactured. Now, if, for example, if you have figs or if you have avocados, it's very common to see where that actual crop was grown in. So a lot of times it also will tell you where that product actually came from, not where it was just manufactured from. So yes, in some cases you will see that.
And another question that came in around that same idea of reading nutrition labels is a lot of times the nutrition labels are written in things like grams or ounces instead of something like a cup or a number of servings. What is the best way to kind of translate some of these, jargons like ounces and things like that when we're reading nutrition labels when it comes to serving size?
Good question. So let's say, for example, you have there's a difference between an ounce and a fluid ounce. That's one thing I wanted to bring light to. So a fluid ounce is literally talking about fluid. So 8 fluid ounces equals 1 cup of some type of product, right? So we might see 8 ounces of juice. That is 1 cup of juice. Then you have a regular ounce, which is weighted ounce. So that is a different conversion where 16 ounces equal 1 pound. So that's more weighted rather than fluid ounces. So that's kind of the difference between there. But if you have any questions regarding ounces and conversions, then it's really good to just do a search on Google saying, X grams equal how many ounces. And a lot of times it'll just kind of give you that calculator where you can just put in that amount that you're seeing, and then you can also get the amount that you're trying to get it converted to.
This is a really common question that comes up, and I know the answer because we talk about it so much in the Mind Diet. But for everybody else, when we're thinking about coconut oil as an alternative oil, canola oil or olive oil, what does the Mind Diet specifically suggest for cooking and oil use?
Yes. So we know that olive oil, probably one of the top tier oils in reference to the amounts of antioxidants that it contains, right? Very rich in what we call polyphenols, which have really good effects on slowing down cognitive decline. But if we're talking about oils in general, this is a whole nother class I feel like we can conduct. But um, some of the oils that we want to consider, if I'm considering some of the best oils to cook in, we're talking about oils like avocado. That's probably one of my top cooking oils as far as like health benefits go. Um, a lot of those other oils, as far as like butter, margarine, then we have to start talking about what we call smoke points, which, you know, heated at a certain temperature, so certain oils can withstand certain temperatures of heating, right? Because once they surpass that temperature of heating, then we start talking about, them starting to be exposed to certain chemicals and starting to become more detrimental to our health. So it's a lot to talk about, but olive oil in general, in room temperatures, most research goes to show that that's one of the best oils that you can consume that's going to improve your overall heart, brain, and overall health.
Yeah, we could definitely do a whole
So
class on
we can do a
oils
whole
and
whole class on oil.
not a bad idea for one of our future sessions. But we definitely at CEP in the nutrition program, we really, those antioxidants and brain health are key. Getting as much olive oil that's, not cooked past that smoking point in your diet,
Mhm.
highly encouraged when it comes to olive oil, and maybe cutting out some of the more of the low quality oils that everyone cooks with.